Hi there, and welcome to my research paper presentation. My name is Kelly Perez Pagasa, and I will be talking about my photographer choice, Stefan Somerstein. Now, who is Stefan Somerstein? Somerstein was born in 1941 in New York City. Not much was said about his early childhood and his early teenage years, but there has been a lot of research and information and history about his photography career and his science career. So Somerstein studied photojournalism in the New York City College. He didn't realize that during his time at the college, he would have iconic photos of the Civil Rights March in the 1960s. So we all wonder what led him to cover the historic 1965 march led by Martin Luther King Jr. from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. So the story was with Somerstein is he was working at a newspaper company, Main Events, in New York City as a student helper. In order to stay informed, he quoted, "We were conditionally in touch with campus members of CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and the SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee." End quote. So during that time, it was a time of discrimination, racism, and unequal rights for African Americans. There would be white and black bathrooms, white and black water fountains. African American would have to sit in the back of the bus. So there was a public attack by the police on non-violent demonstrators, and that really shocked Somerstein because he had heard that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., had called for people from across the country to join him in his massive march from Selma to Montgomery. This was a peaceful march which had Somerstein shocked, inspired, and curious. So he asked his staff reporter, Tom Kelly, if he would supply the text and the information about the march. When the word came that the buses were ready to head to Selma, he rushed home to tell his mother that he was leaving for Alabama. As soon as the buses came, he grabbed 5 cameras and took them all the way to Selma. So for Somerstein, he used a lot of black and white photographs because back in the day that's what they used. They didn't have colored photographs back then. So Somerstein finally arrived to Montgomery when this happened, and he started taking photos of the bystanders, not the marchers. An example here is the march going through a neighborhood in Montgomery, and as you can see, he took photos of the marchers, but also took a photo of the bystanders at the house, the multicultural families just watching the marchers go by. It's amazing how a photographer like him decided to take a photo of the bystanders than the actual marchers, because he wanted people to see the facial expressions and reactions of the bystanders who couldn't participate in the march. Here's another iconic photo. When Somerstein arrived in Selma in the 1960s, he immediately got off the bus and started taking 400 photos of the march and the bystanders. This is one of his most iconic photos. It's the back of Martin Luther King Jr.'s head when he was giving his speech out to everyone who participated in the march. When he first met Martin Luther King, he has actually met him before in his previous peaceful marches. According to Somerstein, Martin Luther King was an inspirational man who was inspired by Gandhi to have a peaceful march and have a peaceful protest against discrimination, racism, and equal rights. So the buses apparently brought 25,000 marchers to the city of St. Jude's School early in the morning. That was the final day of the march into Montgomery. It was overcast and the school fields were muddy from the previous rains, so the marchers had a lot of trouble walking through the muddy areas. And according to Somerstein, quote, I photographed Dr. King close up several years previously when he was the CCNY 1963 graduation commencement speaker. What was amazing is that Somerstein decided to take photos of the reactions, he wanted people to see the facial expressions of everybody else. He made sure that he checked his cameras at their exposure settings and walked along the base of the platform, and then he worked his way up to the place behind Dr. King. He said he knew he had more than 30 seconds to a minute to capture the image because there were so many other photographers trying to take a photo for their newspaper company. And what's amazing is that this photo became one of the most iconic photos for history to be known as the Selma to Montgomery March of 1963. Also, one of Somerstein's favorite photos was this one. This was called "Things Go Better with Coke." This is a photo during the march, like 3 days before the final march day, when a family decided to watch the marchers walk along their neighborhood, and he's obviously looking at the family, seeing how they're multi-generation because there are so many kids, and you can tell from their facial expressions that they are happy, they are neutral, or maybe they're just thinking of if there's really hope for all of them. He said that this was his favorite because of many reasons. It's apart from its remarkable fine composition. He enjoyed it because it had a subtle humor and the marvelous extended multi-generation black family below the lady in the Coke billboard, which was amazing because there weren't a lot of people who took a lot of photos who were African American. It was mostly white people. And he also mentioned that his encounters with Southern people, both black and white, were quite civilized, with the exception of young rowdies that I photographed. An example can be this. These were Southern people who were the young rowdies who were not being nice towards the marchers, just making fun of them. They didn't think about how this can help benefit the African Americans and black people, but of course Somerstein just had to take a photo, and he didn't really like this photo that much because from their facial expressions they just don't understand how important this march means for blacks and African Americans. Also, this was one of the most famous photos as well. This was a photo of a famous singer who stood in front of a building behind a bunch of policemen. This became iconic because it was a famous singer who came out to the march to help demonstrate the importance of equality between blacks and whites. What's amazing is that he wanted people to feel how the Civil Rights March was in their neighborhood, and the expressions make the image more powerful. Her facial expression shows hope, shows happiness, shows faith in everything that the marchers and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is doing for everybody. Also, not only that, he wanted to also like demonstrate how many policemen were also. Some of them were black, some of them were whites, but according to the photo, it looks like a lot of blacks. Okay, moving on. So Somerstein was talking about how he got inspired. He was inspired by two men named Alfred Einstein and Jacob August Riss. Alfred, on the left side, was an American German photographer and photojournalist. His work was very important in history because one of his famous photos, V-Day after the war, it was a photo of a sailor kissing a nurse in New York City in Times Square after the war was done and USA won. It was very well known because it was a moment of happiness, pure happiness, that the war is over, we finally have a free country, and that Germany lost. And on the right we have Jacob August Riss. Riss is a Danish American social reformer and also a social documentary photographer. If anything, Somerstein had his inspiration from Riss more because he was a social documentary photographer. Riss was well known for his image of for his journalistic talents to help improvised in New York City. Also, he was also had an early adoption of flash and photography, so that was one of the most important parts about Riss and his career. So after Somerstein took photos of the Civil Rights March, he decided that he didn't want photography to be his whole career. He was more of an inventor than a photographer, but he still had photography in his life. He went to school to study rocket science, and during his science career, he has built space satellites at the Harvard Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory, also known as the Lockheed Martin. He said that later on in his life, when he's in his early 70s, he would love to return to full-time photography after retiring from science. And now, what we're all wondering, what is he working on these days? Is he still alive? Is he still working in photography? So Somerstein said, and I quote, "A mixture of fulfilling the needs from gallery sales in New York City, and he's developing new shows for other museums and galleries about how his experience helped change his life and how his photographs and images became iconic in history during the Civil Rights March." And Somerstein is right here taking a photo with his favorite photograph, which is the "Things Go Better with Coke" picture. And Somerstein is definitely well known for all his work, and one day he'll take credit, and one day in the future he wants to work for future exhibitions, and of course he wants to use his never shuttered camera. Well, that's it. That's all I have for you today. Thank you very much for listening to my lecture, and yeah, have a great day.